can't see me, you Stevie. Wondering how I reach more evolutions than Eevee and make it look easy.
What's up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Blerd without fear. Welcome back to the channel. Alright, today's video, I'm going to be reviewing Moon Knight number 17 by Jed MacKay and Alessandro Cappuccio. This issue is very crazy. And for those of you who are kind of recently becoming associated with the character of Moon Knight, you think of him as more of a traditional superhero or like kind of a Batman-esque superhero in the Marvel Comics universe. This issue is pretty much meant to divorce you of that idea. Well, because for one, as in the previous issue, and spoilers for issue number 16 of Moon Knight, but in that previous issue, two particular villains that Moon Knight has had to deal with have been giving him a rough go of it. And one particular case, they've been giving his partner in crime, or he doesn't really like to think of him as such, but more as someone who is just, I guess, a dark mirror to his fist of Khonshu, where he is the right hand of Khonshu. Hunter's Moon is the left hand of Khonshu. And the left hand of Khonshu, Hunter's Moon, went against Grand Mal and the Nemean Lion by himself, thinking that his erring more towards the side of tradition and that his just general toughness over, just Moon Knight himself, he felt that he could take them down by himself, and he was incredibly wrong. Moon Knight, having seen that Grand Mal and the Nemean Lion have killed Hunter's Moon, Moon Knight decides to unleash his full bag of tricks on them. And what I love about this comic is that not only is Moon Knight a character in this revenge attempt against Grand Mal and the Nemean Lion, both new characters to the Marvel Comics universe as of the last few issues of Jed MacKay and Alessandro Cappuccio's Moon Knight. The thing that's interesting here is that the Midnight Mission itself has come alive. Now, for those who aren't familiar, the House of Shadows is something that we've actually talked about before. This is something that goes all the way back to 1964's Strange Tales number 120. This is just a house that Doctor Strange used to always deal with. It was a place that existed kind of in between realities and could kind of be whatever it wanted to be. It was a house, it was a cottage, sometimes it was an apartment building or a condo, as we've seen recently, and now it has become the home of the Midnight Mission. And Moon Knight uses this place that can literally be anything it wants. It can become anything it wants. It can be anything to anyone that it desires, and Moon Knight is using it as a weapon against these new enemies. And I love how at first, when he's going against these guys, Grand Mal and Nemean Lion, who are both not traditional super villains, they're just hired guns. They're assassins for hire, no different than you would see of other characters of a similar ilk. Characters like Deathstroke come to mind, but that's just exactly what these guys are. So they're hardened criminals, dyed-in-the-wool killers. They're not afraid of Moon Knight. However, they are just as human as anybody else, and this spook show that Moon Knight puts on is very interesting because I feel like this is something that, while we haven't really seen Moon Knight do things like this before, but he is basically using mind games against these characters in ways that I feel Batman could never effectively pull off. But yet, at the same time, Mark Spector is showing the world how he's changing, because throughout the course of this issue, you would expect this is a revenge mission. He is going out to avenge the death of Hunter's Moon. And while I won't say what exactly happens here or there, I will say what does happen was something I was not expecting, and how this whole thing comes to a close. I will just say that I feel like everything that Moon Knight does to Grand Mal and Nemean Lion in this as revenge for the death of Hunter's Moon is stuff that I think is honestly a fate worse than death. Not to mention, this issue we see a little bit more about what the structure's up to as far as their whole pyramid scheme that they're putting together involving vampires. This actually goes all the way back to the first issue of Jed MacKay and Alessandro Cappuccio's run on this comic. Something that was in the very first issue that you kind of seemed like, maybe it's going nowhere, and then all of a sudden, boom, it's going somewhere. And we kind of see where exactly the structure is going with this, what Tudor is planning to try and make his vampire pyramid scheme organization the most powerful vampire organization in the entire world, even more than the vampire nation of Chernobyl, which is led by Count Dracula. But also, we see how Moon Knight is also not just dealing with Grand Mal and Nemean Lion, but also how he's going to deal with the structure itself, even kind of showing how brazen and unafraid he is to go up against him. Because once again, kind of going back into it, we are seeing more of the personalities of Moon Knight at play here, because up until maybe about issue number 15, we really hadn't seen or heard much mention of Stephen Grant or Jake Lockley, and now we know they're back in the saddle. And while Moon Knight has been jumping back and forth under the guises of Moon Knight and Mr. Knight, while those are still very much things, we really haven't seen those other personalities come into play here, and now I can kind of tell we are seeing those personalities come into play and giving Mark that strength that he needs to face on with the structure as well as the entirety of vampire society as a whole. And I think he has more tricks up his sleeve. I don't think he's just walking into the lion's den, or rather the vampire's den, with just himself and Tiger to show for it. I would not be surprised if we see more guest characters show up in this next issue with Moon Knight number 18. But yeah, all in all, this was a very effective issue. This issue had horror, it had action, it had violence, it had Moon Knight being, I would dare say, almost a disembodied voice of a monster, and just haunting in ways that we don't really get to see Moon Knight be very often, and I feel like is where he's at his most effective when it comes to his superhero shenanigans. But yeah, this issue is fantastic, and I cannot recommend enough the Moon Knight series under this creative team. It's so good. And just seeing Mark running the Midnight Mission as he has been doing, and just not trying to be a superhero, but just being a protector. I feel like this is what makes him, in my eyes, a more successful street level vigilante than most street level vigilantes. And I'm not just talking about in Marvel. But anyways, if you want to know more about what's been up with Moon Knight as of late, check out these videos here. And in the meantime, let me know what you thought about Moon Knight number 17. Keep it plus ultra and sound off in the comments.